and you can literally see the child relaxing in real time. And then here's the cue for all the parents, is the sigh. Whenever you get a sigh, that's a sign of the brain shifting from sympathetic dominance to the parasympathetic system activating.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Autism Empowered Podcast. This is your host and fellow autism parent, Batool Mirza. Today's topic is an important one. I think it's very closely aligned with what I believe in, which is empowering the parent to interact and engage with their child better. We're here to discuss neuroscience and NLP strategies for autism. What makes today's episode extra special is the fact that my guest is someone I've actually trained with and learn from. So technically speaking, you guys, you're about to meet one of my mentors. So when he mentioned NLP for autism, I just knew I had to bring him over as a guest so you guys can learn some of these effective strategies firsthand. And while you may be familiar with how NLP works for adults, I think less is known about its application for autism, especially in children. And that's what I want to dive in with him today. Chris Wyllie is a neuroscientist who has conducted over 5,000 QEEG brain maps. He has literally studied scan after scan how meditation, mindset, neurofeedback, and even brain nutrition reshapes the brain. He works with kids on the autism spectrum, children with ADHD, learning differences, and even elite athletes. But his gift is taking something as complex as neuroscience and making it practical for families. We're going to be talking about the practical application of NLP and neuroscience for autism. We will be diving into brainwaves, mindset, improving vagal tone, and yes, brain nutrition. So I know many of you are listening and trying to support speech for your child, emotional regulation, improving behaviors. Well, today's episode is going to be for you. So let's dive right in. Welcome, Chris, to Autism Empowered channel. You are no stranger to my episodes and what I do. In fact, you're a huge part of the autism movement. And I'm just so delighted that you made the time to come today and join me on my podcast. And we're going to talk about my favorite subject, which is neuroscience and autism. So for those who don't know, I have done my NLP practitioner training with Chris. He's my mentor. He's my therapist. He's my friend. He's a few things. But what I love about Chris is that he walks his talk. He is example personified about what he preaches. Preach is not the right word. He practices it. He breathes it. So we're here to talk about NLP, neuroscience, brain nutrition for autism, because Chris is a neuroscientist and he has learned so much about the brains, and he's going to tell us what autistic brains look like and do. So Chris, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what is NLP?
Well, absolutely. And first off, Batool, I'm so proud of the incredible strides that you've made in taking your story and your experience with IN and seeing your own growth and evolution, applying the NLP, applying neuroscience, applying nutrition, and overcoming your own fears, and we all have them, and just going out and doing it and be a shining example. So proud of you. And yeah, for everyone listening to this, my name is Chris Wyllie. I'm a neuroscientist. I got into the field because I had a brain that was in big trouble. And growing up, I always dealt with severe anxiety and panic attacks. It was very out of control. And in my third year of university, I was actually hospitalized. I was 30 pounds underweight, emaciated, in a really dark place. And I just got to that point where I was sick and tired with my difficulties and I wanted to do something about it. So I switched into neuroscience and psychology, and I was able to connect with a really great doctor who had a son with autism. And it became not only my mission to heal my own brain, but also to explore technologies and science and strategies to help heal his autistic son. So autism for me has always been a very special topic. It's always meant a lot. And really for me, I get more joy than anything than working with the kids. And that's really, really my ultimate passion.
And you're so good at it too, Chris. And I think I wrote that in my Instagram story that I put up, that you have a way with children, child whisperer. And the first time you did the QEEG for Ayan as well, I was like, I'm gonna stand back and watch how he's gonna pull this off. But you have a way for doing these things. Do you think NLP plays a role in that as well, like co-regulation or something?
I think the one benefit I have is I've started my journey when I was like 19 years old. So I had the opportunity to rewire and heal my brain before my brain was even finished developing. And inside, I'm a big kid too. And with me, there's no ego. It's not pompous. It's not me showing off how smart I am. It's a genuine, heartfelt passion and desire to help kids and children and animals. They can sense that energy. And this is the single most important thing to be a great practitioner, therapist, coach, to achieve really great results with children. And as that is, if you want to balance the brain activity of children, you need to first have balanced brainwave activity. If you want to increase a child's alpha brainwaves, you have to first be able to produce and emanate alpha brainwaves. We all know that human beings, we are social creatures, and we interact and are influenced by each other because our brain is an entrainment machine. And that's why you can be in the presence of a certain person and they can make you feel a certain type of way. Some people might make you feel nervous or uncomfortable or uneasy. And you're just like, I just don't feel comfortable around that person. Whereas with other people, you go, my God, I feel incredible around that person. I feel calm. I feel relaxed. I feel at ease. And that's where, for me, I've done so much work to balance my own brainwave activity. I'm able to help and train and lead children there just through mere presence, through mirror neurons, through modeling. And that's how children and how we learn is through unconscious modeling. And it permeates, your brainwave activity permeates everything you do, from the tone and tempo of your voice to your energy levels, to your rate of breathing. And really, when it comes to persuasion or influence, and that's the nature of what we're in. When we're working with children, we want to persuade and influence to move them from one brainwave state to another. And the first most important thing is getting your brainwave state there. Now, you mentioned NLP, and a lot of people are wondering, okay, what is NLP? There's a lot of different definitions. Well, NLP is basically a calculus of how the human mind works at the neurological level. And there's a lot of mental techniques that can be used to get rid of anxiety, to change beliefs, get rid of fears, help get rid of self-critical negative voices, which hold us back. So
Well,
there's
you're
really,
familiar with those. Don't be using using inside information, Chris.
I wasn't talking about anyone specific. And the best thing about mental limitations is keeping them in the past. So if they're in the past, then they're where they should be.
Yeah.
And another,
With NLP, it's like Neuro-Linguistic Programming. That's what it typically stands for. But I think what I admire about you is that you're making it more accessible for so many people, right? But not just autism families, like everyone. I mean, I would say even autism mothers, right? Like, or parents specifically who are carrying so much stress and distress and also grief. And you are the mastermind, I would say, for changing the mindsets. And I mean, there's NLP. NLP's been around. I mean, I guess I've been in love with NLP since the time I came across it with Tony Robbins, but you are embodying it and you're making it more accessible. Tell us a little bit about how NLP can be embraced in daily life. Like, how do you do it?
right. I'm actually working with one of the creators of NLP, Dr. Richard Bandler, who I apprentice with. We are pioneering the neuroscience of NLP. So we're literally building the science of how NLP changes the brain. Because, a lot of people have seen, Dr. Bandler perform NLP, and there's the empirical results. People see changes where people had anxiety or they had fears and phobias, and then all of a sudden the fear and phobia is gone and they can do that. For me, when I first saw that, I was curious, okay, how is this actually changing the brain at the neurological level? So we're working on a major project right now, which is the neuroscience of NLP. So some very, very exciting things are coming. And for me, I've been quantifying, and I actually gave a speech in Orlando where I brought people up on stage and did different NLP techniques and showed them how it changed the brain. Now, when it comes to practicality for parents and working with children, a big part of NLP is the linguistic portion, is learning how language influences the brain, because most of language is processed unconsciously. And this is where, especially if we're working with children, and maybe there is some altered development and left hemispheric functions, like frontal lobe functions or temporal lobe functions and speech production, you can still speak to and profoundly influence the non-dominant hemisphere of the brain, the right hemisphere, through tone, through tempo, through phrasing. And the thing is about the brain is the brain actually develops right to left
That's right. Yeah.
and back to front. So if you have a, child if you have a child, the right hemisphere is going to be the one that's first developed. And you want to be able to speak to that hemisphere and then begin to train and develop the left hemisphere over time. So NLP had there's everything from basic techniques to advanced techniques. Like, for example, learning how to use tonality. So when we speak a statement, it's kind of like straight tonality. When we want to build a response in the brain and get the brain to respond, we bring the command tone down. So it's time to relax now, right? Or can you go do your homework? When the tone goes down, it builds an embedded suggestion. Whereas questions go the other way. They invite uncertainty, right? Can I go to the washroom? The tone goes up. And that's where actually when people get nervous or anxious, their breathing becomes more shallow and command tone goes up, which invites more uncertainty. So developing greater control over your own tonality can help you better speak to your child's non-dominant hemisphere. And then we have the power of hypnotic language. And this is where in the brain, a lot of, I work with a lot of non-vocal children as well. And there's a big difference between speech production and speech reception. They're actually different networks in the brain. Just because the brain can't produce speech yet doesn't mean that it's not listening and registering and processing. And we actually have to be able to speech before we can produce it. And this is where you can train people through NLP trainings and one-on-one coaching. We can teach them how to use the power of metaphor, how to use hypnotic language, how to build embedded suggestions and commands, and how to continually and positively program your child's mindset and thinking to lead them where you want them to go. And you mentioned that, you said that I have a very calming, soothing, child whisperer like effect. Well, that's in part through learning to develop more control over language and tonality, because our tonality is what saturates when we're working one-on-one with a client, even here virtually, right? Our tone, there's tremendous overlap between the kinesthetic and the auditory cortex. And in fact, the vagus nerve even innervates through the inner ear. And this is where sounds can have a dramatic impact on activating more vagal tone to produce that parasympathetic response, which is what we want to do with autistic children. We do want to activate that parasympathetic wing to then turn on the social engagement system, to turn on learning, to turn on exploratory behavior. So that way the brain and flexibility opens up. So that way there can be new behaviors, new learnings. Because whenever we're stressed, you don't have to be an autistic children. All the adults, all the parents will know this. Whenever we get stressed, flexibility shuts down. The brain becomes more rigid. I see that on brain maps. That's because whenever the brain is stressed, as a survival mechanism, it will resort to rigid behaviors to try to get some control, to try to get some grasp on the situation.
And this actually resonates with me a lot, especially the part where you said tonality matters. And when we
Yes.
ask question, increase uncertainty. And we know uncertainty makes the brain freeze or panic or go in an anxious state. And when it comes down to a lot of therapy, so therapeutic intervention, especially for AB or even parents, very subconsciously, because we're like constantly working on language, speech for children, we're giving them a lot of commands, or we're asking them a ton of questions like, how was your day at school? And what did you do? Did you eat your lunch? Who did you meet? Tell me the name of your favorite color. I mean, everyone's constantly asking questions, and we're not
Yes.
taking enough time to model language and model tonality. So I think that is a big takeaway right there of NLP in practice for autism. How can parents use it as a tool in their tool belt?
I love that you're a shining example of that. And that's where just even questions, you can ask a question, but do it an embedded command tone.
Hmm.
It actually can be an embedded suggestion is, did you have a great day at school today? What were the best things that happened at school today? And you can analog mark, what were the best things that happened at school today? What was something difficult that was a challenge that's something you can overcome?
Wow, that's empowering.
So this is where you can use question format, structure your tonality, and embed suggestions to then embed the suggestions in their brain,
Yeah,
right?
this is
So
so exciting. Yeah, I think it will be real great help to utilize some of that for dysregulation and, dysregulated kids. I mean, like, if you talk about occupational therapy, they teach us how to co-regulate. And I think some of what you're sharing is talking about that co-regulation because you're using your voice and your words and the tonality to kind of set the stage here, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're talking NLP, we're diving right into one of the most powerful things you can do as a parent is learn how to pace and lead. Because here's the thing, those of you who will know is who have autistic children, or you just see people, children who are stressed or have learning disorders. One thing you'll notice is breathing mechanics in the physical body is discoordinated. And a little trick is if you coordinate the breathing, you coordinate the physical body, you coordinate the brain. Now, one of my favorite techniques to do is cross-system pacing and leading. So I will adjust the rate at which I'm speaking. Maybe I'll speak up a little bit if I notice they're anxious and stressed and nervous. And then what I'll gradually do is once I've built rapport and we are entrained, the child, then I'll begin to take my rate of speech and gently and slowly begin to slow it down. And I'm watching like a hawk. I'm watching how they're breathing. That's where sensory calibration is our most important skill. So I'm watching to see if, as I slow down now, does their rate of speech begin, or does their rate of breathing begin to slow? And then I will deepen and lengthen my tonality and rhythm and see if I can bring them to a state of deep diaphragmatic breathing. And you can literally see the child relaxing in real time. And then here's the cue for all the parents is the sigh. Whenever you get a sigh, that's a sign of the brain shifting from sympathetic dominance to the parasympathetic system activating. And we know that after we eat like a big meal, for example, you push back and you'll sigh, right? Spouses, partners, sometimes you get in arguments, right? And you argue and argue and argue. And then one moment, you take a deep breath and you're like, okay, I'm done with this. So that's the parasympathetic system kicking in. So we can be really surgical with how we're able to influence someone's state. And this is where neurofeedback, neuromodulation, neurostimulation, these are adjuncts, but the ultimate biofeedback, neurofeedback device is you, because we are human beings and we influence each other and we communicate verbally and non-verbally and energetically, and our brain cells and our brain waves change in response in real time. And I measure it scientifically.
Yeah, tell us about that. I mean, this is while you're talking, I feel myself going in a hypnotic trance. And I'm like, my God, if we all can learn things like this, the quality will bring to relationships, how quickly we resolve issues, how quickly we de-escalate a meltdown, how quickly we motivate a non-compliant child to participate. All those things can come together non-invasively. And you're right, all you need is you. So our brain are the most powerful tools that we have, right?
Absolutely. And I love that you said, a non-compliant child. Let's be honest. No one listening to this was a compliant child, right? So
I hate that word, compliance,
I know.
obedience. And it's doing such disservice to human beings in general and autism in specific, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Yeah. And that's where you as a parent, you have to be able to learn how to dance with your child's autistic brain and how to gently lead them to more functional, healthier states when they get into a state of chaos or a state of hypersensitivity or hyperactivation. How can you reduce that and restore greater sympathetic, parasympathetic balance? How can you get them to a more positive state? And, especially for you, I know for you, for Ayana, you are probably his, pillar of stability and comfort. And you were talking about NLP here, you are an anchor for a feeling response in his nervous system. And that's where your presence being there will relax his brain, right? And we all have those, people and things that we attach comfort to. And that's all anchoring. And that's what a word is. That's what a memory is. That's what a trigger is. It's an anchored neurological response where you have that external stimulus and it activates an internal response inside us. So one of the things I like to teach parents is never waste a great positive state. So when your child's in a great state, learn how to anchor that state so you can reaccess it in the future, right? So if you're going to give them something they love, connect a certain way of looking at them, certain facial gestures. So that way, whenever you do the facial gesture, now it will help to produce that state. So that way, you just give them, whether it's a certain little smile or a certain gaze, like when you give them their favorite toy or favorite foods or whatever it is. Or, if they say, mommy, I love you, give them a certain gaze. And that's a certain way of you and your child to connect that will help them to reaccess unconsciously that feeling of love and comfort inside. So that way, when they have, whether they're stressed, trying to do something at school or trying to learn something new, and the brain goes into that state of chaos and stress from hypersensitivity, that's where you can just give them that gaze, that look, fire off that anchor to generate that positive internal state.
Even like, I mean, I learned that from your workshops and your classes, like the touch and,
Abs-
accompanied with my tone, I can like, I see sometimes I am panicking or feeling anxious about certain things. I can just put a hand on his shoulder and be like, you got this. And then anchoring that,
yes.
yeah, would that be a good example?
That's a great, and there's no limit to this. No limit to this. All you're doing is basically with an anchor, whether it's a touch, whether it's a mantra or sang or a visual anchor, is you're basically just helping to get a pathway back to that internal state.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're
That's
building that memory trail to get back there.
yeah, that's incredible. Give
And
me
I do that.
more. What else can we do? This is incredible stuff. Okay, no, and I get this. For parents listening, obviously autism is a spectrum. So you have a child that may not be looking at your face or may not be listening, or they reach a place where they're in a meltdown. They're not really processing information around them. You need to learn how to de-escalate certain situations like those. But I guess what we're talking about is how to create harmony and bond overall that you can tap into over a period of time so that those meltdowns become far few and in between and you have a more regulated, stable mood in your child.
You got it. It's a different in approach and paradigm where instead of being reactive, instead of coping and managing, what we are doing is proactively creating desired neurological change. And then the brain will repeat whatever is most familiar. So the problem is with the autistic brain, and I measure this on brain scans, is a lot of children, they've never experienced balanced, regulated brain activity. So you almost have to, and when we work with a child, I have to build it from ground zero. And I have to educate their neurology on how to produce, certain brain waves in particular centers of the brain. And the reason why autism is such a diverse spectrum is because every brain is unique. And there's no truer case of that than autism. And there's a saying, when you've seen one autistic brain, you've seen one autistic brain. Now, we do need some form of standardized, normalized criteria to diagnose things to help parents get access to more resources. And I'm a big fan of that, but I'm not a fan of a diagnosis being a, life sentence, right? We're using the information to then help stimulate positive change. So when I work with a kid, I'm looking at them, okay, cognitively. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? Linguistically, strengths, weaknesses, behaviorally, strengths, weaknesses. And the one thing to know is every neurological pattern is context specific. So just because your child has difficulty focusing, let's say in school or doing math, observe them throughout the course of a day. And I guarantee you, you will probably find them doing certain activities where they are able to focus, certain activities where their speech is better. And unfortunately, it's probably related to whether it's a technology or a game, but that is proof that the brain is capable. So then what my job is then to help make the brain be able to get into that neurological state now in school, now in doing math, so that way it fires in that same pattern of activity. Now, what are some hallmarks of autism? Well, I've done thousands of brain scans, and one of the things I see is that the autistic brain is notoriously low in alpha production. So when I show brain maps and scans, you just see a ton of blue, which equals very little to minimal alpha wave production. And what the alpha wave is, the nice symmetrical rhythmic wave, looks like a nice sine wave for those of you who remember from math, that is like the brain's idling point. It's like a middle point between sympathetic fast wave activity and parasympathetic slow wave rest and digest. And the alpha wave is like the pace setter for the brain. And there's a very important subcortical structure called the thalamus. And this is the part of the brain which is like the sensory relay station. So it takes all incoming visual input, auditory input, kinesthetic input, and gustatory input in its synapses, and it filters and regulates all that input. Now, the olfactory, the sense of smell, actually bypasses the thalamus and has direct projections to the brain. So you can anchor certain positive states with certain smells, for example, and smells can trigger memories. That's where, like, if you walk past freshly cut lawn, it can bring you back to childhood memories, into the house you grew up, or playing soccer on a field. So basically, this thalamus, its key resonance is alpha, and that alpha wave is so important to apply the brakes to the brain to avoid sensory overload. And what happens with a lot of children is the thalamus has difficulty doing this regulation job, balancing all the sensory input because of the lack of alpha. And it leads to too much stimulation of the motor cortex, which can create, motor problems and rigidity because now the brain's overly stressed. So restoring the alpha rhythm in the autistic brain can dramatically improve language, cognition, social function, learning. And it's not only just alpha, it's alpha in key centers of the brain, alpha over especially the posterior, the somatosensory cortex. So we talk about brainwaves, and brainwaves are neither good nor bad. The brain is kind of like this musical orchestra where each node and hub, whether it's the prefrontal cortex or the temporal lobes or the hippocampus or the amygdala, are like these individual musicians that have their sweet spot frequency output, tone, and rhythm. And if any of the individual musicians are too loud or too quiet, it throws off the whole orchestra, the whole song, which is our state of consciousness. So basically, my job with neurotherapy and neuromodulation is to restore each central brain hub to its sweet spot resonance, so that way the orchestra of consciousness, it sounds beautiful and it functions really well.
Synchronized.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's so many neurological patterns of autism. We could probably do a full 1 hour podcast just on brainwave patterns of autism.
Will bring you back for brain anatomy and because I loved what you said, and like I interviewed Dr. Robert Melillo, and his theory, well, it's not a theory, it's a reality. It is the same, that the right side of the brain develops first and then goes into the left, and it is there, that particular development that got stunted, and that makes a lot of sense, and that's where we want to focus on as well, and we see that there are deficiencies in the right side of the brain. But let me backtrack a little bit.
Well,
And
no, not deficiencies in the right side of the brain. The
Mhm.
right side of the brain develops first.
Yeah.
So therefore, during the course of development, if there's any neuroimmunological stressors, the left hemisphere is more susceptible and vulnerable because it's more in flux because it hasn't developed yet. And that's where the language and speech centers, frontally and temporally, they don't develop till, we're talking later in teens, all the way up to 27 years old. So the frontal lobes don't finish myelinating until around 25 to 27. So this is where a lot of people may wonder, why do we see a bit more autism incidence in boys than girls? Well, that's because the female brain, language centers and speech centers develop faster. They develop first. So they are more firmly developed at an earlier age. So therefore, any biological stressors that come along, those parts of the brain have already developed. Now, the female brain also does have denser connections across the corpus callosum. This is why women tend to be better at emotional processing, why women can multitask when us guys are just amazed as to how a female can do 5 things at once when we have difficulty just doing 1 thing at once, for goodness gracious. But guys, all the men watching this, the male brain in the parietal lobes that control mathematical abilities, visual spatial abilities, they do tend to develop first. But what,
Makes sense, because
yeah,
I see a lot of parents comment about how their kids, boys, they're like, oh, well, he can do math, or he's into numbers, and they know alphabets, but functional language is not quite spontaneous. How would you explain that the same way?
yeah, exactly that, because those parts of the brain develop first. So the thing is, the difference between like a human baby and like a chimpanzee is, chimpanzee comes out with like the brain pretty much fully formed, right? a human baby comes out, number one, we look like the Pillsbury Doughboy. I mean, I know I sure did. But number two, we have this relatively unformed, undeveloped brain. And during the first 25 to 27 years of life, that's how long. That's the period of time where the brain really develops, grows, and forms its connection and specialization. So any type of immunological or neurological stressors, whether pre-pregnancy, definitely during pregnancy, or during development, can alter the brain's course of development. And, what I was saying before is because the left hemisphere develops secondarily, it can be more vulnerable and susceptible to any stressors that come along development. And the networks of the brain that are impacted are the frontal lobes and temporal lobes and those speech production networks. And as I mentioned, speech reception and speech production are different networks. You have Broca's area at the front left in the majority of brains, plays a big role in the motor speech production, where we have Wernicke's area in the posterior temporal lobes, plays a big role in speech reception. So just because your child may not be speaking fluently, do not underestimate how much is going in and how much they are in training to. And again, that's where when I do brain scans, I do look at frontal lobes and see activity there, because here's the key thing. Everybody likes to talk about the amygdala, especially when it comes to stress. Well, what is the brain region that keeps the amygdala in check? That's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And if there's any dysregulation in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, it cannot sufficiently inhibit and modulate the amygdala, which thereby leads to the chronic activation of the HPA axis, leading to this chronic state of stress. So optimizing prefrontal function is really, really important.
I'm going to say how.
Yeah. Uh, and
How
that's, I mean,
do that?
that's a multi-layered approach. So when it comes to, autism, I do a lot of neuromodulation work where I work on stimulating and increasing the firing of the frontal lobes. I also do a lot of speech and linguistic work, because in language, there's kind of 10 on-off switches that produce sounds, which then produce syllables, which produce words. So, I'll work with children on specific sounds and words to actually stimulate the frontal lobes. So we can use language and mental activity to stimulate the frontal lobes, to bring more blood flow, to improve neurogenesis and plasticity in that part of the brain, to improve frontal lobe development. When we train the frontal lobes, it's just kind of like going to the gym and pumping our biceps, right? You get bigger biceps by doing bicep curls, and you get stronger, denser, more specialized frontal lobes by training them over and over and over and over again. And that's how meditation works. That's how mindfulness works. That's how deliberate focus works when it comes to exercise programs. So we're not just talking about autism here, right? Parents, we also can talk about improving your focus, improving your memory, getting in shape, losing weight, feeling great, all that great stuff. It's all connected.
I mean, I was about to say, because some of the things that we've talked about today consist of us being present. And I understand the primary caregivers will likely be moms, even if they're dads, doesn't matter. But whoever's the primary caregiver, the parent has to find within them to be present, to be there. And that comes from controlling your own mindset, your own physiology. I mean, you're not going to be able to pour from an empty cup. So from that aspect, you got to work on you first, and then bring that learning to your child.
Absolutely, Batul. And I'm sure you could attest to this as you have developed yourself and you've taken action, acquired skills to overcome whatever was holding you back. I won't say whatever those things were, or any baseline level. If you've brought your level of anxiety and fear down, have you not seen progress and improvement in Ayan at the same time?
Massive. I think our children are mirrors, right? They mirror what they see us experience. And if you're exuding calmness and confidence and that quiet, they tend to feed off that, and then they would mirror that back. It makes our work easier when we're trying to guide them through different aspects. I mean, they go through a lot. Like if I tell you Ayan's schedule, it's really hectic right now. We
Yes.
have like bunch of things going on, after school activities and bunch of things. And sometimes I am frazzled, but then you have to reach into that space. And I think that what you're referring to is that anchoring, and you anchor yourself. You remember
Yes.
that state. You anchor it so well that you can access it on demand, and then you go through the rest of your day. But I have one question, and I know I'm going to get asked that, so I'm going to ask that. alpha waves. How do I go about creating that? If that's what our kids are missing, what tools am I using? Yeah, okay, my physiology, that's one piece. Is it music? We talked about breathing. Would it be music as well? I know you've mentioned a few tracks to me in the past before, so I'm making my way there.
You tell them how to raise alpha brainwaves, Batool. You know what to do. I love it how you're doing my job there. You're just so there's music, there's
I'm
there's
leading.
breathing, there's pacing and leading. Let's go through the gauntlet of strategies to increase alpha brainwaves. The first and foremost is environment. So blue light, non-native EMFs from electronic devices, they're stimulatory. They increase beta. The autistic brain is already riddled with excessive beta and high beta. Parietal lobes, right hemisphere, across the brain, but often, sometimes not enough in the frontal lobes, like I said, to regulate the amygdala. So the first step is getting nature therapy, time outside with barefoot to the ground, connected in nature, especially in the earlier parts of the day. And what that does is that our Earth's natural resonance in the ionosphere is in the Schumann range, which is an alpha wave and harmonics of it. So just by being connected to the Earth, it helps to increase our brain's alpha wave production. And the subjective test for this is anyone listening to this, you included, Batul, you'll know that when you get out into nature, all of a sudden the chitter chatter in your brain, the busy brain, all that beta wave activity of active mind cortical processing, it quiets down and you become more present. Because you know what alpha does? It actually shuts off busy brain. It shuts off cortical processing. It shuts off over neural excitation, thereby shutting off excessive sympathetic outflow, excessive stress. So calms your mind, brings you to a state of mental clarity. So getting some form of nature therapy. And I would encourage, and that's where like even going for walks out in nature with your child, doing deep breathing, which is another way. We mentioned in autism, the breathing mechanics are off, right? So training them to gradually do deep diaphragmatic breathing. Now, there's a little caveat with the nervous system. If you try to push the nervous system in a direction, it will become resistant or stubborn. It will try to go the other way. So that's where like almost the more you try to relax, the more anxious you kind of get. So here's a little trick. What you do is you exaggerate the negative feedback, right? So if a child, you'll notice, is holding their breath and not breathing properly, you literally have them hold their breath for an extra second, and then they will be forced to exhale and then inhale more deeply. So basically, you want to be able to train your children to breathe more diaphragmatically, more rhythmically, so you have more coordinated breathing. And that's going to improve alpha wave production. It's going to help stimulate the vagus nerve. So we have getting out in nature, getting grounded, and you can connect these activities. You can add music to the mix. As we mentioned, the vagus nerve can innervate in through the inner ear, and sounds have a very therapeutic effect on the brain. And that's where it's well studied how like classical Baroque music, like the Pachelbel and Canon D, has a very relaxing, soothing effect on the brain. So this is where you can experiment with your child and play different songs and sounds and see which ones make their brain happy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to add to this. One of the occupational therapists I was working with had us do something called as listening program or something. It's like therapeutic listening. And it had just bunch of classical music stored in the sound device. Like, I mean, you could use any headset or you could just play it around your child. Really, it doesn't even need to be if they can't tolerate. And she asked me to look for this sigh that you told me about. And the
Yes.
minute you said it came together for me because you're hearing this, and I saw Ayan listening to this music and then go like, and there was a release and the body calmed down. I'm like, okay, there.
It's like, whoa. And you're seeing it in real time.
Real time, yeah.
Right? Because we're not always going to have 20 plus electrodes like I do to
No.
be measuring brainwaves in real time. So what you want to do is you want to look at the physiological markers, breathing, muscle tonus, facial symmetry. You're looking at all these things, right? Their emotionality, the gestures that they're giving off, especially unconsciously. So that way you can see how their brain's firing from moment to moment. And that way you can really find the things that activate that nice relaxation response, be able to replicate that when and where you need it to de-escalate those meltdowns, like you said.
My God, our brain is such a driver, right? It really is. There's not nothing that we cannot overcome through by accessing the right states of the brain. There's so much to cover, and I'm so enjoying this conversation. And we're gonna get into the QEEG. I know you've done a few. You've done far too many. 5,000, by the way, for people who are listening. 5,000 QEEGs Chris has done, which pretty much makes him the expert of how the brain looks like and what the brain looks like when it's not actually balanced. What do you see when you see the autistic brain?
Yes.
What kind of QEEGs? Like, how do you know this is out of place? What do you see?
Well, one of the hallmarks of mental health, and this is the big, popular talk right now, is achieving brainwave balance across the major frequency spectrums. So we can think of each frequency almost as a gear, a speed of the brain. So we have slow wave delta, which is kind of like first gear. And that tends to dominate when we're in deep sleep and we get physical recovery. Very important rhythm of the cerebellum and the brainstem, that delta rhythm to support all our physiological functions. Then next we have the theta frequency range, and that is the natural resonance of the limbic system, the hippocampus, the amygdala, for the proper level of emotionality and arousal as well as memory encoding. Then we have alpha rhythms. As I mentioned, alpha is the middle idling point that shuts off cortical processing and thinking and busy brain and brings us to that state of being present in the flow. And alpha is really important. We mentioned the right hemisphere. Having enough right hemispheric alpha is very important. Having enough alpha rhythm in the occipitals is very important especially for serotonin release, and having enough on the somatosensory cortex is very important to avoid anxiety and overstimulation. And then we move into these beta frequency ranges. And what beta does, this is what stimulates cortical processing, stimulates active thinking. So sometimes I may say beta and people think beta is bad or it gets a bad rap. No, having sufficient beta is very important, especially in the low beta range in cognitive centers like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, like the frontal lobes. So that way, that enables you to not only be able to think, have executive function, focus, keep your attention on point, but also regulate the amygdala. So when I'm doing brain scans, I'm looking at all these different frequency spectrums, and I'm looking at not only the frequency production, but where, how much, where are the imbalances? And then just by balancing brainwave activity, naturally it will improve cognitive abilities across the board. And I've done so many QEEGs because when I was studying neuroscience and I got my hands on EEGs at 19 years old, I thought, here is an incredible tool I can use to test how everything influences the brain. Boom, I can take these brain supplements, I can see how it changes my brainwave activity. Right? I can try this new neurofeedback program. I can see how it changes brainwave activity. I can take these NLP techniques and linguistic patterns, see how it changes brainwave activity. And you know what else I did? I spent hundreds of hours with my brain just hooked up to an EEG, and I learned how to control my brainwaves and how to get my brain into different states. And I've been teaching my clients how to do the same ever since.
Well, it shows, Chris. I met you were already a successful person, but you have taken your personal journey to an incredible level, global level. And, it shows. It shows your understanding of the human brain and how to overcome these challenges and tapping into that productive mindset.
Yes.
I'm just really lucky and glad that you're sharing that information with everyone else so that they can get, a little bit more of their own brain, be able to access the vast capacity that their brain offers to them. We're never going to get where you are. We're going to get a little closer from where we have been.
You know what, Batool? We all have our own hero's journey. And I had my own hero's journey and my own kryptonite, my own problems, and my own neurological quirks and mental problems I had to overcome to become the man I'm destined to be and the man I want to be. And similarly, you have your own hero's journey, Batool, of challenges that you face and how you're turning your pain and your struggles into your power. You know what the beautiful thing is? We're talking about science, but a human being is a work of art. It's the art first, then the science of human optimization. And while many people may be inspired and they may learn a lot from my story, my journey, my teachings, they are going to get something unique and special and magical from Batool's teachings.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I mentioned, Chris has been my NLP trainer, and I've started using NLP techniques when working in my practice because my work is primarily with autism moms. I don't differentiate. I mean, I work with a lot of autism dads too, but just because of how things are. I mean, like, yeah, there's no discrimination going on here, but I just work with a lot of autism moms and come on, I relate with them, right? And being a mother too. So, I mean, obviously, I bring that to the practice. And yeah, one of the biggest things that I start with is the mindset coaching. And it's not like, you know, I'm going to, where I'm going to meet and I'm going to do mindset coaching. No, it's like how Chris has taught me as well. We're doing a lot of pacing and leading, and I'm using the mirroring and being present to so that they can feed off that energy and I'm modeling it for them. So I think NLP is the most important technique a parent and a mother can use for herself personally and her family in almost every single scenario. And I have you to thank for that because you can read from books, but it's not until you spend some time in Chris's company, and Chris is available for one-to-one coaching for parents, for families, for personal coaching as well, if that's something that you wanted to work on. And he is great. Like he brings you results, you know them, and they come about way more swifter than any of the therapy sessions that I have attended before. And he gets you results. So yeah, Chris, my man, he walks his talk and he gets you results. So you remember that. Chris, I'm not gonna let you go without you telling us a little bit about brain nutrition. I know I'm nearly at that hour mark, so I want to not hold you back too much longer. But brain nutrition is gonna be key here as well. And I know I've heard you talk about it. Tell us a little bit more.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you came back to that because I want to tie the knot
Yeah.
because we talked about how do we increase alpha brainwaves. Well, there's a specific neurotransmitter that activates the vagus nerve. It's also present when we're in REM sleep and we dream, vitally important for memory, and that is acetylcholine. So I like to say this dopamine gets all the press, but acetylcholine steals the show. And what acetylcholine does is it does help to activate the vagus nerve. And it's literally a new hypothesis, which is the acetylcholine anti inflammatory pathway where it's very helpful not only for autism and regulating the vagus nerve and producing that parasympathetic response, but it's also helpful for Alzheimer's and neurodegeneration. People just want to improve their memory. So getting enough choline in the diet is vitally important. And this is in large part why seafood and food from the sea and marine-based foods are brain food is because they're loaded with choline and DMAE, which is a precursor to acetylcholine, and they improve acetylcholine production. And that's just going to help improve focus, attention, get rid of brain fog, improve linguistic function, and help you just to be sharp and on point. And all the parents, moms, and dads, I like how you shouted out the autism dads there as well. Very kind of you, Batool. You'll have those days and times where your mind might feel foggy or sluggish, probably deficient in choline. And stress can deplete neurotransmitters like choline. So getting enough choline in the diet, seafood, and of course you want to eat fish that are smaller so they have less toxins and accumulate, less heavy metals, so smaller fish, sockeye salmon, lake trout, go smaller on the scale there. And then also we have, egg yolks, fantastic for the brain. A lot of people get scared on cholesterol, but the brain is where most cholesterol is stored, and cholesterol is a vital substrate for all our hormones as well as for repairing neurons, membranes, sheaths, etc. So you want to have sufficient cholesterol. And then we have all our beautiful phytochemicals. That's where all the beautiful colors in foods. So blueberries, for example, have anthocyanin, really, really anti-inflammatory for the brain. And what those phytochemicals do, they increase neurogenesis in the hippocampus, the major memory center. And it's very important because stress downregulates neurogenesis in the hippocampus, shrinks the hippocampus. So we want to consume lots of healthy brain foods that improve neurogenesis to combat and offset that stress. Then we have one of my favorite are the roots, like the turmeric root, which has curcumin, which also helps to produce a really powerful growth response in brain cells and also helps to heal the gut. And that's those nice, beautiful yellow colors, really great for the gut. Love ginger as well. Then we have, things like cacao, those nice, rich, flavonoids in there. contains literally called PEA, which is like the love molecule. So you literally feel like in love. That's why, I personally believe, sometimes women just crave chocolate because they just need some more love. Guys, yeah, you can't love and appreciate the women enough. Those are some basics in terms of brain nutrition. Of course, when we're, dealing with autism, sometimes you got to strip everything down and go back to ground zero and introduce one variable at a time to make sure that there aren't any sensitivities there or specific factors influencing, causing a stress response in the gut brain.
Like,
And then in terms of carbohydrates, I love berries. I love sweet potatoes. So you can see, possibly how they respond to rice, and sometimes maybe even, people favor brown rice and those because they have more fiber, but sometimes stripping everything away, any potential anti-nutrients or phytates, for example, any digestive inhibitors, just doing the pure white rice could be a little bit more effective. Also eat seasonally, so that way when we have longer light cycles, the sunlight's like natural insulin, so that we can handle more actually carbohydrates and more sugars during the longer light, during the summer, spring months. But during the winter, I go to a more ketogenic approach where it's more protein, more fats, and less in terms of fruits.
yeah.
And the reason why I like healthy fats, and basically we're going for fats, is we want fats that aren't inflammatory. So that's where like the whole kind of omega-6 rich seed oil things are coming. So I like to cook and use lots of fats like coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil, because those fats are very energetically dense. So we know at the cellular level, it's not about calories, it's about ATP production. And 1 mole of a fatty acid actually produces 4.5 times the amount of energy ATP production as 1 mole of a carbohydrate. So having the healthy fats is really important to deliver more fuel for the brain, not only for the autistic brain, but for all the parents who want more brain health and brain function themselves.
Like
So
MCT
the health,
oil and stuff?
yeah, yeah. So you can utilize MCT oil as well. Just monitor how it affects the gut. It can kind of clean you out a little bit. So be mindful of that.
Yep. I mean, there are all these different food sensitivities that a family should always rule out before jumping into anything. Omega-3, I know well, I see you chucking oysters directly.
Right.
We can't make our kids do that. But yeah, how do I get zinc from my food? And what about omega-3?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of talk about nutrition on the internet, but it's my contention that the king of nutrition, the be all end all, is a fatty acid called docahexanoic acid, otherwise known as DHA.
Yeah.
And this is a fatty acid that's never been replicated or replaced in 600 million years of organic evolution. And that's because DHA is like cellular antifreeze. And it's concentrated in the tissues of marine based animals, especially in cold Arctic waters, because it keeps cells flexible, supple, and signaling. And as we know, all neurological decline is the opposite of that, the breakdown of signaling. So what DHA is, it's a fatty acid, it's an omega-3 fatty acid that's selectively concentrated in our neurosynapses and cell membranes that improves neuronal communication, improves the cell's ability to be flexible and to communicate, because cells will be flexing and changing its shape, thousands and thousands of times. And that produces the vibrations, which I measure in terms of brainwave output on scans. So DHA helps with neuronal communication. And pretty much most of the studies and literature shows that DHA supplementation improves intelligence and cognitive scores in children. So making sure you're getting enough DHA from clean sources. I always like to go with whole foods first, and that's where I love, like sockeye salmon, for example, and smaller fish. And if you can source, especially for your children, source a very pristine, whether it's a wild Alaskan kind of salmon oil, something that just you can add in some of the extra DHA. And I can actually measure on brain scans where I see that DHA supplementation helps to normalize alpha wave activity. And that's how it, in part, improves cognition. So it's really, really important, especially for vegetarians watching this, finding a way to get more DHA. And if you don't eat fish, then you got to find a way to get it from algae, which is, of course, what the fish and the crustaceans, the little shrimps and stuff, what they eat to get the DHA. And then the biggest test is, do you notice cognitive improvements, and you should. And one thing on DHA is just be careful not to mix too much saturated fat with the omega-3s because they can compete for absorption. So like if you're having a meal that's high in saturated fat, just consume it at a different time than you're consuming your DHA. Just a
Yeah,
little
that's a good
caveat
tip.
there.
That's a good tip. Yeah. Chris, we never got a chance to talk about neurofeedback. I think I'm going to have to bring you back in another time to discuss all those different modalities. That's what you mean when you say neuromodulation, right? Neurofeedback is neuromodulation. I mean, there are more techniques for neuromodulation now, but is that what you mean?
Yeah, neurofeedback is one form of neuromodulation, yes.
Yes. Oh my God. I wanted to cover that too. I know that's something. I did a poll on my Instagram and everyone was like, with 80% of my followers wanted to know about neurofeedback. And I'm like, yeah, but we started talking about neuroscience and NLP. And a lot of these things we talked about obviously are the foundation of neurofeedback too. But do you want to quickly leave my audience with something so we don't leave them hanging?
I'll give you a great analogy.
Okay.
People want to know what is neurofeedback. Now, Batul, you are looking particularly lovely today. I mean, you always got your natural aura going. But here's the thing. When you woke up and you're getting ready for today's podcast, what did you do? You looked in a mirror. And if you saw your hair out of place, you took a brush and you combed it and you fixed it up and you put your makeup on and you look great. Now, our brain, we don't have a mirror for what our brain's doing. We don't know. So what neurofeedback is, it's a way of giving your brain a mirror of its activity so it can self and course correct. So that way the brain can be aware of any brainwave imbalances and it can be gently and positively led to more brainwave balance so it can correct itself. So in short, neurofeedback is like a mirror for your brain.
That's amazing, Chris. And for the families who don't have access to neurofeedback, they would benefit greatly from the conversation of today because we're talking about using your own energy, your physiology, your tonality, all these strategies, the brain nutrition to start optimizing your child's brain and yours. So it's not that, oh, well, I don't have access to it. It's fine. Sometimes I struggle to get access to it. Chris is not always available, but we still have these tips and these strategies that you bring. It's consistency, right? And brain likes repetition and consistency. And you show up in these ways every day.
You got it, Batul. Every moment counts, right? The brain is constantly being entrained and every moment is altering the wiring and firing of the brain. So everything you can do as a parent, the more you can layer on these different modalities, the language, the NLP to optimize the psychology, the more you can balance your own brain waves so that way you can be that mirror that your child can entrain to. And then doing like the neurofeedback or neuromodulation or like one-on-one NLP with me, that's basically the stimulus to set the brain up for success. And then you have those daily habits and patterns that you do to keep reinforcing those positive neurological changes.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for giving us such a detailed breakdown of how to go about optimizing a child's brain, your brain, and more than that, also giving us hope about what to do. This is very much about empowering the parent and how to bring these strategies to pull everything together. Deeply grateful for you making the time today. I know I'm going to have questions, but I'm going to have to bring you back and we're going to discuss some more brain anatomy, maybe brain waves. But yeah, you're coming back one way or the other.
I'd be happy to.